webinars. Happy New Year, everyone. Thrilled to have you with us today. Appreciate you taking your valuable time. Today's webinar is leveraging automation and AI to prevent fraud, myths, research, and reality. Before we jump in, I'd like to thank my webinar partner today, Esker. They not only share my commitment to thought leadership, but they share my commitment to promoting the professional success of all those who use their products and services. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you'd like a presentation, we're doing that right now. If you'd like a copy of today's presentation, please send an email to Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Again, that's Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Also, if you're interested in a certificate of attendance for today's webinar and you did not indicate that when you registered, please send an email to Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. So really looking forward to our topic today. We're absolutely going to talk about the role of AI and automation and all those good things. But first and foremost, what you're going to hear throughout the webinar today is that technology can only play so much of a role, right? In fraud mitigation, there's an awful lot of risk exposures that are user related. So even if you have the greatest technology and the greatest policies, there's still issues that are related to people and them not understanding things and taking action. So let's keep that in mind as we go through our webinar today. Just a little bit about our roadmap for today. First, we're going to talk about some payments fraud trends. I'll share a little bit of research from a few surveys, one of those being the AFP Fraud and Control Survey 2024 version. We're going to talk about fraud risk mitigation. So I want to go through the process. And so I think it's really important. I don't think that's ever covered enough. And so what we want to do is we want to look at, what does a solid process look like? And then we'll talk about the process. We'll talk about identifying and managing the exposures. And then as we go along, we'll talk about the role that AI is playing and can play in payments fraud risk exposure mitigation. Again, then part of that, we're going to talk about sources. I'm going to talk about specific threats. And then, of course, we'll talk about the tools for payments fraud risk mitigation. And then, as always, we'll wrap things up with some actionable advice as well. I have a chat area opened up, this new version of GoToWebinar. If you want to pop a little message in there, go ahead and do that. We got some emojis going on. So if you like something, if we make you smile and laugh, which we always try and do, please go ahead and give us an emoji if you're out there paying attention this morning. Now, the topic itself is so broad, I'm not going to be able to cover everything that you want to see. As always, a main goal is to have you take an action from our time together today, whether that is a conversation, right? Looking up additional resources, reaching out to myself, reaching out to a colleague. So keep that in mind as you're going, and we'll spawn some new ideas, and maybe it's just a motivation to get you going on your professional development in this year that we're in already. So first and foremost, let's talk about why it matters. So hopefully you don't have this problem, but if you need to convey to those at your company that payments fraud is important and needs attention and potentially needs investment. First and foremost, every company is at risk, right? Payments fraud is rampant. We'll talk about that. Fraud schemes are constantly evolving, getting more complicated, right? With everything AI. So we will definitely touch on that as well. And so what AI is doing is really allowing them to not only constantly evolve is an understatement, right? Now they can turn AI loose in doing all these different machinations that are going to make them more successful in their attempts at getting people to take actions that are going to lead to fraud losses at companies of all sizes. So your company's at risk. It doesn't matter how big or small your company is. You are not immune to it. And maybe there are a few companies out there, but almost every company writes checks. So you write checks. That's a huge source of fraud risk, and it's still the most common attempted fraud. Your company uses email, so we'll talk about that. I don't think that's talked about enough as we get into our treasury mode and we talk about fraud mitigation. We need to really talk about email and how we can work with our IT teams and teams on the email front, because that's where a lot of these attacks are occurring. And your company has people related exposures related to their actions and their education. Your company has process related exposures related to how things work, especially if you have processes that are disconnected and siloed and there's a lot of manual intervention going on. We'll talk about that. And then your company has technology related exposures just due to the fact that you're probably using more than one system, and there's a lot of systems involved. And as you use systems, the systems that you use are going to often lead to exposures from the technology that you use. So your third party providers as well. And then your exposures grow as your business grows. So as your company is growing, especially if your company is growing internationally across borders, you're dealing with companies overseas, you're dealing with customers overseas. So those exposures are going to be new, and they're going to be magnified as well. And then, of course, fraudsters do fraud all day, every day. So it's just a little precursor here. So just some contextualized little survey. The AFP 2004 Payments Fraud and Control Survey Report. If you haven't read that, it's a great read. It doesn't see 73. 80% of companies experience fraud over the past 12 months. 26% believe that the fraud level is going up, but other surveys show that's even higher. 96% of companies, this is a fraud in the cyber era. 96% of companies were targeted at least with one fraud attempt. So everyone's out there. And then from their survey, 67% expect fraud to increase. And so again, just the other survey, 78% of companies were targeted. 78% of companies that were targeted incurred multiple losses. And according to the Cyber and Fraud in Cyber Era 2024, and 36% of victims of successful fraud lost more than $1 million. Hello, I think if that's not going to wake you up and your CFO and your board up, I think that says it all. And another a fact alongside of that is a lot of times there is fraud risk, and fraud has gone on, and it takes a while for companies to even identify that it's occurred or a data breach has occurred. So that's something that people should keep in mind and keep people vigilant as well. So the fraudsters are often very patient, and we'll talk about how these schemes happen. They will sit there and they will wait, for the folks on your side that control payments in any way. They'll look at your keystrokes. They'll look at how they communicate. They'll actually start getting into looking at how they communicate with folks and how your whole approval process works. And they'll even get into getting those passwords and everything. So it's very hard to detect what's going on. So let's talk about the process. And these slides to me may be the most important slides or the key takeaways here. If you haven't done this, you should map your source to pay, right? Let's go all the way back to supplier onboarding and supplier management, right? Those are very important, and they really add a lot of risk exposures to your company. We'll talk about those. Do that in painstaking detail relative to all people, processes, and systems involved. If you haven't done that, you're really not going to have a good handle on all the potential, right, sources of those payment fraud risk. And we need to look at those first. We need to identify them, and then we need to look at how we mitigate them and how we prioritize mitigating those exposures. And then identify the risk exposures relative to each person, process, and system involved in your S2P process. And we'll get into this more later, but as a treasury professional, right, as an approver, right, anyone that moves the S2P from source to pay, anyone who has any approval role in that, they have exposure. They're introducing risk to the systems and your process and your systems as well. And then what you want to do is start to look at, okay, where do opportunities for fraud exist and why do they exist? And oftentimes what we'll see with our risk exposures is it's possible for us to leverage automation and or AI to mitigate those and even remove those risks. And then what you also want to do is look at the relationships. And so how are they impacted by other people, processes, and systems and controls or lack thereof? So we need to start looking at how these risks exposures are also interrelated, and then we'll start to see untangle those a lot. And once we look at how to right size our technology, including automation and AI, we'll see that there's opportunity for those risk exposures. Also, need to add that there also are potential risk exposures to leveraging tools that use AI and machine learning. And then this is very important. Just say, put my treasury and AP hat on. Collaborate with all internal parties that your company's involved in your P2P process. So identifying risk exposures. So let's make sure that all parties, let's make sure that that mapping is done correctly. Let's make sure you understand all the actions, right, that are moving and just to get a supplier onboarded, that are moving in order to a payment, and then on the backside where that payment's going, and even how it's getting posted. So let's make sure that we understand all those things. Make sure that we're informed. Uh, it's like you don't know what you don't know, and that's very dangerous. And then we also need to collaborate with external partners to mitigate potential payments risk exposure that are caused by relationships with them, especially those of you who are taking credit cards and the evolving electronic payments side of it. And then as we invest more in fintech, we need to look at those risk exposures, make sure they have all the certifications and all that good stuff. And another key way is in managing our supplier relationships. We'll talk about that more later. And then we need to understand the relationships between the payment types and the risk exposures. And number six is really important. And to me, I see this as you get the most bang for the buck. Educate all employees relative to the roles they play and should play in mitigating and managing risk exposures. Inform them what actions they take and don't take could potentially be creating payment risk exposures for your company. And then we got to identify those risks. We want to prioritize the mitigation and management of the exposures. We want to identify potential tools to mitigate those exposures. And of course, we want to look at technology in that. We want to look at AI and machine learning and automation as well when we're doing that. And then we want to invest in tools and potentially people to mitigate those fraud exposures. So I think it's important that who owns the process, it should be collaboration across, not just in treasury risk, right, AP, AR. So we should all be on the same page. And if we have a risk management team as well, and of course we need to collaborate with our IT folks as well. Many reasons, one of which being that email is a huge area of risk exposures. So let's talk about sources, just to put a box around it. So when you're looking at there's all this information. How do I get my arms around it? So I like to frame things in there's internal exposures, right? Our people in our system, and then there's external exposures based on external actors at our company. So those we'll talk about all those schemes, and then there's technology as well. So if we're passing files back and forth, uh, maybe maybe we're using multiple ERP systems to manage bank information. We're sharing bank information. So anything that introduces that risk based on oftentimes disparate systems and maybe even sharing files in Excel that have sensitive information that aren't secure or encrypted. So let's dive in a little bit. So your internal sources. So you want to look at some of those sources. Of course, we have accounts payable, treasury, right? Bank accounts, signatories, payroll, procurement, accounts receivable. So when we're starting to look at, okay, what are the potential sources? We have folks in accounts payable. Who are all those people? What are they doing? How are they doing it? In treasury, right? What are your people in treasury making if obviously affecting payments, approving payments, working on templates, and then we can look at bank account signatories as well, who has authority to do what, write checks, approve checks, and things of that, especially in your foreign countries. And then we want to look at payroll as well, who's involved in setting the payroll, uh, editing the payroll, controlling where the money is being sent from your payroll, the amounts, the dates, and then procurement we talk about STP on the sourcing side, and then even on the accounts receivable side as well. So there can be money that's supposed to come in that can be diverted as well. So put a box around that a little bit there. So give you a little more information for those of you that really want to dig in, have a conversation. with folks supplier information, who inputs the supplier information, who can edit it, who approves changes of supplier information. Of course, we're treasury folks, a lot of us, so what's really going to stick out is that bank account information, right? Who's able to change that bank account information, who's able to manipulate maybe the parent-child relationships there, and then the invoice information, who's involved in approving an invoice, who can make changes to an invoice, approve for payment, and who approves changes to invoice. So we see common areas that people are doing things. They're changing things on the invoice. They're first of all, they may be submitting a false invoice. They can manipulate the price on the pricing of the goods. They can manipulate the quantity of the goods. So there's a lot of areas for the invoice processing. And so some of the ways that AI and automation can help is one on the learning side. So let's see if there's something unusual. Oh, supplier X usually has a $10,000 payment. Well, now it's $1 million. So it's going to look at that and flag that as well. And then just if there are changes, maybe there's a change to the GL account that's normally there, so it's going to track those changes. It's going to notice patterns, right? If someone's in there changing invoice information, and I also should put on there employee expense reports as well. So those are also places where we can see fraud, and AI and ML can start to look at things as such. Hey, John is getting all these things approved, excuse me, at a really high level compared to past years, and the timing may be different. And there's ways to look at patterns as well by supply, by where people are spending money, why and how. And then on the payment execution front, who controls when a payment is made, who can change or approve when it's made, who can change the amount of the payment, and who can make changes to the account and beneficiary data. So just in the whole S2P process, anytime you can remove a manual process that's going to involve manual intervention, the keying of data. So we want to mitigate that. We also obviously want to have a a robust audit, right? Audit procedures, and then we also need to understand, right? We're going to use AI and ML. Okay, let's understand how it works. How do we set up warnings? Do we set up warnings? Do we automatically flag things? Do we automatically stop payments from happening? And then where do those approvals and notifications go? Why and when? And so again, talk about who can approve payments, who manages payments in terms of the number of approvals, right? So we look at things like on your execution side, do you need dual approval? Do you have two-factor authentication as well? And are there exposures there? So your external sources, again, you have your counterparties, suppliers, vendors, banks, fintechs. You have your external system, their external processes. And then I could spend hours on emails in social media. So so we will dive into email exposures as well, but in general, there needs to be education for your employees about how to use emails, the specific types of potential scams there are related to emails, things to look for, like wrong domain names. Just have them keep their eyes peeled. Your IT team just emails on the way in, nefarious links coming in as well, just emails that are unexpected. And also in this new world of AI, companies need to think about, right, the role of emails in actually moving funds. So as fraudsters get more sophisticated, and as sad as this may seem, excuse me, in some cases there are so many deep fakes. There have been fakes in getting some sort of video call approval as well. So I was at an event in December. We were talking about fraud, and certain people have things set up now where there needs to be a safe word. So if there's any kind of big transaction going on, right, you may want to consider going to the point of a safe word. We need two people to approve it. We also have to have a phone call, right, with someone, say, is this exactly what we're trying to do? and then they have to use that safe word so you're not inadvertently communicating with someone who you think you're communicating with. And then social media as well. Are everyone involved in the SP process needs to understand that people will go after them on social media, especially on LinkedIn. So these people will figure out who at your company is able to move payments, approve payments, sign contracts, do things like that, and they will go after them via social media. And so that's a way for them to worm their way into your company and figure out who's the person that I should go after. And they'll figure out how to get that person to trust them, and then they'll transfer that into the business relationship. So we need to we need to monitor, right, what people are doing, what people are sharing on social media, especially in areas like LinkedIn. But we also need to think about not tell people what to do, but just people need to be sharing, right, what they do at work, how they do at work. We need to be cognizant of that. So, all right, so let's go ahead and let me launch our first polling question here. Appreciate everyone taking a moment to answer the polling question here. We're asking you, what's your greatest concern relative to payments risk exposures at your company? Is it your internal exposures, maybe your team? Is it your external exposures, whatever those bad actors might be, and maybe that third party risk? Or is it your technology exposure? Just on your tech stack, you think that those disparate systems and lack of communication between those systems, in addition to other areas, are going to be the biggest issue for your company. Again, if you're interested in receiving a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all the polling questions. I'd appreciate it if everyone would just take a moment and answer the polling question here. Then I'll go ahead and share the results, and then we will transition here, and we will talk about specific payment fraud threats. So let's go ahead. All right, thank you everyone. We're still getting polls in. So let's take a quick peek. All right, so we see that, not surprising, external exposures are 66% right of the way, and then technology exposures, and and obviously all of you are interested in learning how technology can help us help you potentially mitigate and understand those exposures as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. So this is from the AFP Frauds and Control Survey. So looking at sources: outside individual, business email, compromise. We touched on that. The vendor imposter, that's often done now many ways. Phone calls, and that can actually happen by video calls as well. On the check side, post service office interference. I had this happen when I was a treasury manager. Someone would find a check in the mail. Yes, people still send checks, and someone interferes, gets the checks, gets your account information. Invoice fraud, we touched on that. Bad actor account takeover, so someone figures out, hacks accounts maybe to your banking platform, and then this could be a third party outsourcer for your company who somehow penetrated in your system. So again, just to get you in the mindset of what are these specific types of fraud effects, and then when we're looking on how I educate my team, anyone involved in the S2P process, what are things that we need to be paying attention to? And then just a little bit older, but again, there's a lot of different names for these things. So one of it is understanding the jargon, right? Ransomware. That's probably one of the worst case scenarios, when someone, if not the worst, takes over all your company's data and requires you to pay them a big ransom, or they delete everything. They're there's a lot of that can be done there, but that's something where you want to make sure that IT is involved, and just take a look at things like, okay, how are we backing up everything that matters, now that it's not a lot of data is in the cloud that has to be secure. But in the old days where we had all these tapes, you might be doing both somehow if you have a hybrid system. And then we have, just to take a look at this: some attempts, no success. So you look at where there was a loss, payment diversion, and BEC and CEO fraud. So what we should be doing is, coming up in our program, we should actually have some testing, right? To have people come and test our systems, have someone approach someone, a CEO fraud, and hire. A lot of times, people will hire an outside firm to say, okay, we're trying to assess how solid our network is and how solid our people are as well. There's still a big amount that actually is successful on internal employee fraud. So unfortunately, if there's opportunities for fraud, they're probably going to happen. On the employee fraud front, people need to understand, right? Things like we have a fraud policy, it's enforced. Uh, we are watching you, right? If you do this, you're going to get caught, and there are going to be consequences. And then if you're educating everyone, right, in the STP process, they understand, right, that they are being monitored, and so they're going to see, well, it's going to dissuade them from being a bad actor. And then again, as we automate processes, a lot of times that will remove people from the system, that will remove processes from the system. So as you remove people and processes from the system or manual intervention, that is going to help mitigate your risk exposures. So, and then just as always, we need to be looking at our exposures by work, how we change so that remote, everything's great. But as we work remotely, we need to be cognizant of the business email compromise is the risk is going up, and data theft is it's people are it's increased just because there's probably more people accessing your network remotely, and so making sure all those connections are secured and encrypted. So how that data, so now you have data coming in maybe from different computers and different laptops. It's so some of the permissions have to change, and then internal employee fraud. So just interesting there to just be cognizant of why our mission is never ending, and we need to be sure that as we change our business practices, how we work, where we work, and then the countries that we go into, and the currencies that we go into, and the suppliers we have, those are all things that can impact our risk exposures. So just for some clarification on those that want to dive a little bit deeper, is BEC. Basically, oftentimes the scammers impersonate employees at a third party company, and again they'll figure out who to target. It's not a lot. Sometimes they'll do that by LinkedIn as well, and they'll use AI on LinkedIn to figure out who is doing these things. So the fraudsters will impersonate colleagues, they'll impersonate bank partners, and they'll convey a sense of urgency and consequences for for inaction. So a lot of sometimes we can stop these things on the way in, right? With our algorithms, partners, technology, uh, uh, working with our partners, so that AI can help on as emails coming in, recognize whether it's potentially fraudulent, whether it's spam, and part of any education program is that people need to have the mindset, if something is making you seem nervous or wrong, it's probably wrong. So let's figure out what to do about it. And you should have a policy of, okay, John's in Treasury, John gets this strange email, who should John call, right? Basically, John should call the person, right? And say, especially if it's CEO or someone of that level, you're going to do this or you're going to get fired. You got to teach them what to look for, but also say, okay, it's time to make a phone call, right? And then we might also, like someone told me, we might have to have that safe word as well. So it's better to be sure when anything, uh, get your radar up on yourself and your folks as well. So just social engineering is another term used, similar to type BEC scam. So they trick people into sharing information, clicking on links, or initiating or approving payments. So just some terms, just some terms for you that you might hear. I don't want to read through all those and tell you exactly what they mean, but those are just the terms, and these are all different types of things that we need to consider when we are educating our team, or maybe it's something where we're in front of the CEO or the CFO or the board and they say, "What are we doing about pretexting?" And you're just like, "I don't know." Yeah, but make sure that you're up on those terminology terms, especially if you're the one who is involved and has accountability for that payment risk management. Actually, everyone at the company should have some accountability on that front. A deep fake is, again, seemingly real video with realistic movements, right? It's inspiring someone to share information, take an action, and that's category of deep fakes is business identity compromise. Again, they can create a synthetic corporate persona or imitate existing employees. So those are things that people need to be made aware of as well. And we talked about ransomware. So let's talk about the tools that people are using, can be using, should be using, and let's just look at some of the top challenges. Uh, Identified by the Fraud and Cyber Era survey. Employees not following processes and policies. So we need to make sure that people understand the processes and policies. They're following them. We need to be able to convey that we are managing them, and they need to understand the consequences of not following them. And then siloed processes that block collaboration. So again, if we are not communicating, collaborating, if people don't have a way to communicate when they think something is wrong. I had this issue when I was a treasury manager. I had an employee who worked in the accounting department, and she was responsible for reviewing the things that got into our positive pay exceptions. Positive pay is for checks, and it makes sure that the we send a file to the bank, and the bank makes sure that the check amount and the date and everything lines up. So there was an exception item. So instead of walking over to my desk and asking me about it, she just pushed the button and approved the payment. So she didn't really understand the consequences of her action, how important it was, and did not see that there was something. I wasn't able to identify something nefarious. And so for me as a treasury person, I could have done a better job in training her what to look out for. I did actually warn her that what was happening was we were closing down an AP account from an acquisition, and that's where the fraud occurred. So those are things. There are certain actions that are going on by your company that are increase fraud. It just about every acquisition that we made, we experienced AP fraud at the company that we were acquiring, and yes, that could have very well been an internal person. So those are things we need to look at, and then unreliable third-party data. So those are things. All right. So as we talk about technology, let's go ahead and I'm going to launch the next polling question. So we talked about AP automation. Just curious as to our audience, where are you at in terms of AP automation? Doing it a long time. You started in the past 12 months. You're in the discovery phase and you're vetting solutions, or you have no plans, or you see no benefit. So we will definitely dive a little bit later into the S to P process and identify areas and how AI and automation can help us identify and mitigate these risks as well. So some of the benefits of, I guess it's more than it's automation and related technology. It gives us visibility uh, into what's going on, so we understand the why of things, the bottlenecks, and we understand everyone's actions, right? And actions taken in the process. So thank you very much, everyone, for sharing that with me. So we have over half our companies responded, or they've been doing it over a year, 13%, 14% last 12 months. So we have 28% that are in the discovery phase and vetting those solutions. And obviously, payments fraud mitigation is just one of the many benefits of AP automation. And so for me, it's really a two pronged approach here. Um, what we see here. Give me a second here. I gotta. All right. So the two pronged approach is the productivity, right? That we have. We're removing manual processes, and we're streamlining information and removing asymmetries of information. That's definitely a part of the value here, but it's also allowing us to make data-driven decisions, right, on how we pay suppliers, when we pay suppliers, and also identify trends that and areas that we need to be looking at. So just to level set the adoption of fraud prevention tools, what we're seeing, what we've seen in the past. So the different areas, right? Fraud prevention, right, is before it happens, and then detection is, like I said, oftentimes things aren't even, no one knows that fraud is occurring or has gone on. So that's the detection side. And then so these are just tools. Behavioral profiling that really looks at the actions of folks. And then we have the detection using other things such as biometrics. So how are people uh, using tools to prevent fraud and what's out there? And so a lot of the I mean, it's fraud prevention on one side, and it's also detection. So you want to detect it when it's in the process of happening. So it depends on whether you define fraud as it happened, or is there a risk that we're trying to avoid here. So just some interesting research from my friends at Strategic Treasure for you to check out. So it's just as far as technology, just some results. 56% of companies in 2023 are looking to increase the budget dedicated, and there's been a trend of companies spending more on fraud prevention, detection, and controls. I certainly concur with that, and I think companies really need to look at, right, where are you at, right? Where should you be? And again, it's about the exposures that you have. Let's really understand the exposures that we have, and then how can we leverage process and technology together and train our people so we can mitigate those and understand what the right size of that investment looks like. So let's kind of dive in a little bit on places to prevent and leveraging automation and AI to help us mitigate some of those risks. There's risk associated with our suppliers. So the one thing that supplier management automation does, it allows us to have efficient supplier onboarding that helps us with our supplier relationships. And then we have OFAC. Those of you who have anyone sending money anywhere across the world, we'll dive in that a little bit. OFAC compliance. If you are non-compliant, there are serious consequences, and there are tools out there that actually do a search, so they won't let you add a company if there are sanctions there. So it will warn you on those sides, and there's other compliance as well, and then bank account information controls as well. So when I was in Treasury, we owned all the bank account information. Someone in AP could actually put in the information, and so a lot of what the supplier management portals do is it puts that on the suppliers. So to put in their information, to edit the information as well. So in a sense, we are offloading the risk. It doesn't mean we don't have responsibility for it. So we need to work with our suppliers, but in a sense that mitigates the risk of our folks internally having instigating some sort of fraud, and then bank account information maintenance as well. So those controls, who could do what, and then maintenance as well. And then looking at those rules, that automation to me, anytime there is a change to or potential change, right, there should be dual approvals to changing bank accounts. That's just my opinion. And then in who is making those changes or approving those, we should look at two-factor authentication in those as well. And then one of the things that AI and machine learning can do is it can identify, right, a pattern potentially. Let's say we're not using supplier management automation. Oh, Jones changed the bank account information even more than once, right, with a company, let alone across companies. And so as we're starting to look at that, that's some sort of behavioral monitoring there. So we can look at that, and then that those automation tools also allow us to track, right, the actions of individuals, and then, like, again, look for actions that are out of the ordinary and don't make sense, and then help set up alerts when there's abnormal activity. going on. And so just a little bit about having a uh, self-service supplier portal. It lessens the risk to the phishing email. They control that bank account information. The information is coming from the right source. You control that. It's fully it's audit friendly, and it's in general there's easy user adoption with your suppliers. So you get real-time updates of communication, process compliance. Your supplier relationship starts when you onboard them. So again, we want to make sure we're capturing all the risk on that S2P process. And so let's just look at this, how this works. Share a workload with the supplier. Again, it helps us share the workload with them. Onboarding document, and then we'll talk about this. It gives us automatic vendor checks. So it'll actually check bank account information, see if that's valid, and then we'll talk about OFAC in a moment. And then the approval workflow, it reduces risk and protection information, and then it gives your company visibility over the process as well. So all these things are important. So we talk about OFAC, it's the Office of Foreign Asset Control Risk. So that's something we need to be monitored and managed, and that's obviously hard to do manually. So not understanding that risk can lead your company to face legal issues, financial issues. There are often fines. You have reputation risk. You're going to lose revenue. You're going to lose your revenue, but you're also going to be flagged as a company that does business with people that have sanctions, and so you're going to get more regulatory scrutiny. So again, often in payments risk, we say P2P. Well, we need to take it even a step back on the S2P as well, source to pay, and then the bank account information. What it does, it works on the TIN number of the bank, the account name, address. We all know we're treasury people. Most of address, bank account number, routing number. Make sure all those things are making sense. And then these are all benefits for you want to make sure bank account verification is part of your process anytime you're adding a supplier. And then we talked about monitoring the maintenance, fraud prevention, payment security. We want compliance. It's just going to it will reduce your risk. So another way to help mitigate risk, and I think we should all have these, we should all have a fraud and controls framework. So so we can, when we're educating our folks, uh, right, all those involved in the STP process, let's have a formal policy. Well, it needs to be current and it needs to be understood. So, and we need to make sure it's understood across the globe. And this becomes even more important as let's just say we are outsourcing parts of our AP function or all of it outside our walls. These are incredibly important, and that also is going to add another level of risk to our STP process. All right, let's break things up a little bit. Let's ask another polling question. Just this one's interesting to me. Do you feel those involved in your source to pay process are well educated relative to payments, fraud? I'm not going to tell on you. Agree, strongly agree, neither agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. Again, anyone interested in receiving a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, you can send an email to Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. You can also send an email to Ernie@treasurywebinars.com and also to request a copy of today's presentation as well. So I'm going to go ahead, leave the polling question up for just a few more seconds. If you haven't voted, just please give me a click here. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick peek here. All right, okay, thank you everyone that voted. So I'm glad to see that 19% of you agree. So we still have, right, the folks. So we still have a significant amount of people that neither agree or disagree or strongly disagree. So depending on your role, there's definitely an opportunity for you, not to blame people, but to ask questions, offer ideas, and this can also help communicate the value that you can bring to your company as well. Those that agree and strongly agree, I would imagine they have a formal policy and that policy is shared with folks, hopefully at least once a year or once every 2 years. And it's really important to update folks, especially if you are making changes to your business model, where you're doing business, but also on the acquisition front. So I need to mention that as well. As you bring on acquisitions, you are really inheriting how they are managing payments risk, right? Until you can take over their control of cash. So that's something you want to be sure is on the due diligence checklist. So take a look at, right, how are they making payments? Who's involved in that process? How are they bringing on suppliers? How's that bank account managed? And especially those of us who have been through the battles, it's oftentimes if you're buying, used to be when you're buying a smaller company, you're getting a lot more manual processes and a lot more different risk. So you may have this solid framework, right? But you need to make sure that every acquisition is incorporated. So it's the weakest link. So everyone needs to have the same attention to things that make our risk management successful. So thank you so much for that. And then just I mentioned this, we just talked about it, and my friend strategic treasurer did this a few years ago, but that I've had conversations. Training is tremendously important, and it is just showing you some ROI to that. And I think all things are important, but I think the business email compromise part and the social media part and also letting people understand how they fit in and then just things that are off right in the approval process. Maybe you're in the approval process and an amount looks weird, a quantity looks weird, and a lot of times in the AP automation systems you have the ability to look. Let's take a look at the invoice, let's take a look at the customer activity, and then the AI and machine learning will help maybe do some red flags on that as well. But the more, excuse me, the more our employees are engaged in taking ownership, the better off that you're going to be. So in this survey, 70% train their employees on security annually. I would hope that everyone would seriously consider that as well. So let's talk about mitigation technology. Just pretty common for us in Treasury. Check fraud. So checks are still being written. So a little bit different sometimes because we have the e-checks, but these are fraud prevention. I strongly encourage. I would say I strongly encourage pay positive pay, which actually includes the beneficiary name as well as the check and the amount number, and segregation of duties. I absolutely think that's really important as well. Sometimes those not in Treasury don't quite understand. We don't want the same people setting up payments and approving payments, and reconciliation, daily reconciliation is incredibly powerful on that. And then those writing checks, there are many new ways to make sure that if we are using checks, there are ways to make sure that they are tamper resistant and it's going to be easily detectable if they are used as well. Oh, excuse me. And then ACH fraud, just some of the things that work. Reconcile accounts daily, and companies are leveraging AP automation, other solutions to make that possible and not take all day. I would say ACH blocks and debits are excuse me, incredibly effective. We used to fight all the time with our vendors and even tax authorities that you're not going to debit my account. So those are things that you want to look at. I would say start as tight as possible and don't relinquish that control unless you have a very good reason to do so. And then this is it's a little bit 2020, a little bit dated, but I like this because it shows all the different ways that you can help mitigate BEC scams, user education and training, right? Two-factor authentication, uh, company policies for changes, right? Levels of approval on your invoices, bank account information. We can have color-coded emails, right? Things that people can only do internally. Confirm request of transfer funds. Let's say we need to make a phone call. We might need to have a safe word as well. So just and really controls on these on emails and how people are opening their actions related to emails. And then just the reconciliation, just bank account. Uh, reconciliation, and then just visibility. You can't manage what you can't see, right? It maybe someone's overseas, maybe you're the decentralized, something's gone overseas, and it's your person, and you don't have visibility, right? And all of a sudden, oops, there's oops, but not that's big oops, $2 million gone. Oops, the longer it takes you to detect that, the less chance you have of getting your money, seeing your money back. Not that it's ever easy to do that. And then here's some more just general security principles as well. Segregation of duties. We talked a little bit, not enough about firewalls, antivirus, encryption of data internally, externally, multi-factor authentication, employee testing and training. We talked about sanctions training, and then especially on the AI and ML side, the anomalous behavior in detection tracking as well. And then I talked about having a fraud policy. It's just things shows the adoption rate, but it's incredibly important that we can do that. And then I think it's important to assign accountability, right? Someone has to have responsibility to track fraud and stay current on these development. So just interesting, they ask us formally assign roles and cadence, right? So just establishing that level of accountability is absolutely important as well. And then this is just interesting relative to certain actions from the fraud in the cyber era survey. What is it that banks want to see? They want to see companies use payment control services, reconcile accounts, dual controls, and security training and testing. So offering you some tools to consider on your side. And so, obviously, a lot of ground covered today. So, really, to me, what I talked about earlier, the important thing is having that, I would say, that framework in place. So, you have to be able to identify what those exposures are, right? And then we'll start to look at, okay, what are the tools we can have to mitigate those exposures, and then how do we invest in those tools, right, for our company. And so, once we identify those exposures, right, then we can look at, well, first of all, automation is going to help us mitigate a lot of those exposures by removing people and processes from the system. It's going to alleviate the manual keying of information. It can alleviate the number of emails going back and forth. So the number of ways, so that just in general, the number of exposures that you need to look at is going to go down through automation. And then also important, automation facilitates timely communication, our warnings as well. Automation can be used to enforce our policies, our internal policies, our limits, our red flags when when we put up our radar. And then on the a couple things on the AI side of it. Uh, One is that it's going to help us identify patterns, right, that are unusual, and raise some red flags there. It's going to help us. It also helps us automate routing of things and making sure escalation points are going to the right places. And so it's going to make us more effective in that manner, and it's going to detect right behavioral patterns. And we can also use generative AI as well in helping us if there's certain areas uh, that we might want to look at. So just queries. Okay, how many bank account changes did we have? Okay, who's the person responsible for those? And so there's a lot on that front. And then on the just in general, right? The AI helps us learn, right? Learn from our data and identify things that are abnormal. So again, it starts from the source to pay process, right? All these exposures that we need to look at in automation, which makes it better on a lot of fronts. And then the invoice, we need to make sure the invoices are secure, the approval is secure. The amounts are secure, right? The activity is secure. So there's a lot there where automation AI can help us. So you want to let me go ahead. I want to go ahead and launch polling question here as I wrap things up for us. Let me do that. All right. So I appreciate everyone taking a moment to answer our final polling question. Again, if you are interested in receiving a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, you're gonna need to answer all the polling questions. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, please send an email to Ernie at treasurywebinars.com. So let me give you just a few more seconds here, and then we'll wrap things up with some closing content and really give you guys a fine point to take away from the webinar. And again, my goal is to have you take an action, right? So I don't know if I've been very entertaining today. I'm not in the swing yet, but hopefully you've learned something, or you've at least thought it's going to make you take an action. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for that. So my final wishes for you: educate each employee, if you don't do this already, involved in your source to pay process on how they directly and indirectly impact risk exposures. Collaborate internally and externally to identify, mitigate, and manage exposures, right? Leverage supplier portals to minimize manual data entry, manual intervention, and in payments related work for. Leverage technology that optimizes payments processing visibility, right? Leverage technology that automates the invoice to payment flow, and leverage technology that automates internal and external controls and policy compliance. So I want to thank everyone for your time today. In closing, I want to thank my webinar partner today, Esker, who's, again, their commitment to thought leadership is amazing. And I actually go to their website to stay on top of my game. I also want to let you guys know, if you have not heard already, news from Treasury Webinars. We are going to be launching our Treasury Truth or Dare podcast. So keep your eyes out for that. We're going to talk about all things Treasury. We're going to show people that the Treasury profession can be fun. So it's just like Truth or Dare. So I'm excited about that. And if you're interested in being a guest or know someone who'd like to be a guest, please just let me know. And with that, I want to thank everyone once again for your valuable time. I'm going to change my ending, right? Please have the courage to live your Treasury truth and dare to be great in everything that you do, everyone.